Today is the first Sunday in Lent, and Lent is a time of preparation within the church calendar as we head towards Easter. And in some church traditions, Lent is really big. In other church traditions, Lent won't even be mentioned at all. And in lots of church traditions, it's somewhere in between. And over the last few weeks, we have been thinking about various themes. We've thought about love, we've thought about peace, and at our last all-age service, we thought about compassion. And I thought it'd be a good opportunity for the rest of the year to use some of these extra services that aren't on our kind of part of the normal preaching schedule, to think about some of these values, some of these characteristics, some of these virtues. So in May, we are going to think about patience, and in November, we're going to think about joy. So there's whoever's doing that service, there's one song that you can put in straight away. And today, to tie in with the beginning of Lent, we are going to think about self-control. And we're going to start with a sword drill. So, for those of you that don't know what a sword drill is, the Bible describes itself as the sword of the Spirit. And so if you want a paper Bible, Carol's just shut the door, but they're out there on the table in the foyer if you want to go grab one of those, or else you can use your phone. The rules are that you must draw your sword to start with, whether it's a real Bible, a paper Bible or a phone Bible, slip of the tongue, and you must not have your finger in the index page or the equivalent. So whether you're using an online phone version, you can't have it all set up with your finger in the index page. And what's going to happen is I'm going to give you a Bible reference. And when I say go and not before, you are going to take down either your Bible and go through it, or you are going to type in the reference. And then the first person to get to it is going to jump up and in a loud voice read out the verse for us. So, draw your swords with sound effects. So they're up in the air. Draw your swords. There should be no swords with fingers in index pages or anything like that. Right. So remember, and the reference is Galatians chapter 5, Galatians 5:22. Go. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against things there is no law. Those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. Since we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. And so here we've got one of Paul's lists, and there are various lists that he produces in the New Testament. This one he calls the fruit of the Spirit. And it includes some of the characteristics that you would expect to see in the life of someone who is following Jesus. These are things that you'd expect to see on the outside because of what is going on the inside. And for the adults in the room, we're going to be looking at this particular passage on the 28th of June as a part of our new series, which is going to be starting after Easter, when we're going to be looking at the Holy Spirit. And you'll see from this list that Paul includes self-control. And that's what we're going to be thinking about throughout the course of the service. So who has been watching the Winter Olympics? So a few of you have been watching the Winter Olympics. So the New Testament was written in a world that was heavily influenced by Greek and Roman culture, and competitive games, competitive sport was very much a part of those cultures. And as we saw from the quiz, the Olympics started in Greece in 776 BC, and so it's quite likely that Paul knew about the Olympic Games. After the Olympics, the next most important games that were part of that world were the Isthmian Games, and they took place in Corinth. And Corinth was a place where Paul lived for 2 years, so he would have almost certainly known all about those. And Paul naturally uses a number of sporting analogies in his writings. And this brings us to our second sword drill. So, same rules as before. So you need to draw your swords. Remember, you don't start until I say go. And the reference this time is 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 25. Wait. 1 Corinthians 9, 25. Go. Great. So this is part of a slightly larger section that I want to think about today. So this is 1 Corinthians 9, 24 to 27. Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, I do not run like someone running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike a blow to my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. And so we know that if you're a top sports person, if you're someone that's competing in the Olympics, then you've needed to train really hard, and there are all kinds of sacrifices that you will have made to get to the top of your sport. You need to watch the things that you eat. You need to make sure you get enough sleep. And so if you want to win a gold medal, it's not just enough to turn up to training maybe 2 or 3 times a day. You need to make sure that everything else in between your training is also focused on that goal of winning the gold medal. And Paul says that we need this kind of discipline, the sort of discipline that a sports person might have. We need this kind of discipline if we're going to be followers of Jesus. So if bobsleigh is your hobby, you're not going to win an Olympic gold medal. If ice dance is a hobby, then you're not going to become Olympic champion. And so following Jesus cannot just be a hobby. And we're going to think more about that in a moment. But I'm wanting us to think a little bit more about these verses from 1 Corinthians and the parallels that Paul draws between top athletes and what it means to be a Christian and to be a follower of Jesus. Now, as we read from Galatians 5, we know that the fruit of the Spirit does include self-control. But I expect we hear a lot more about love. We hear a lot more about joy. We hear a lot more about some of the other fruit of the Spirit than we do about self-control. And I'm also very conscious, as I've been preparing for today, that it would be very easy for people to take away things that I didn't say, or to feel that it's gone down one particular route and that's not where I hope we end up. And so I think it's going to be important that we take away a lot of it. I'm just going to be touching on a few things, not going into a lot of depth, and just the idea is that we take this away. Maybe in home groups this week, we can think about it and explore it some more. But for each of us, we need wisdom to know what it is that God is saying to me in this particular context in terms of self-control. Because what it means for each of us is going to be different. There'll be different areas in our lives where we need self-control. And there will be different things that each of us does, things that we reach for that make us feel better, that might not be helpful for us. And so, for example, it might be, and I'm going to talk quite a bit about food this morning, and that's why this is the slide I thought we'd have. Because for me, one of the areas where I struggle with self-control is chocolate, crisps, cake, and biscuits. If you were to offer me a plate of sweets that look like that and left them at home, by the time you got back at lunchtime, the whole lot would have gone. There is no concept of I'll have one now and one tomorrow and one the next day. Start the packet might as well be empty, and it soon will be. But that's me. And so I'm going to use my example to help us think about this. But I'm not saying that you shouldn't eat chocolate. I'm not saying that you mustn't eat crisps. That's not what I am saying at all. So maybe it's food. And maybe if we need to make ourselves feel better, what we do is we go and get a biscuit, and then another biscuit, and then another biscuit. Or maybe we get in after a hard day's work, and we've just got into a routine. We get in the door, we pour ourselves a glass of wine, and maybe by the time we've gone to bed, half the bottle has gone, maybe not. Maybe the issue we struggle with is our phones, and we spend ages and ages and ages scrolling or playing on our phones. Maybe where we struggle with self-control is with our temper. We get behind the wheel of the car and something just happens that we have absolutely no patience with anybody whatsoever. I was walking up this morning and on our road, just round the corner from our house, a lady was driving and she stopped. I don't know why she stopped, but she just stopped in the middle of the road. And Mr. Tesco's came up behind. And all I could hear, it was like about 8:30 in the morning on a Sunday. And I thought, just calm down. And then he manoeuvred around, and as he was coming past, I thought, well, all the neighbours around here are going to really appreciate that at that time on a Sunday. But absolutely no patience. We might struggle with things that we watch, and that might be where we need more self-control. And so I thought I'd run through some of the reasons why I think we don't hear more about self-control in church. And the first one is that we are saved by grace. The Bible makes it very clear that, for example, in Ephesians 2, 8 and 9, we're saved by faith, we're saved by grace. It's something that God gives us, it's a gift, it's not something that we can earn, it's not something that we can deserve. And so some church traditions have distanced themselves from anything that might remotely smack of trying to earn favor with God or anything like that. And so maybe that's one reason why we don't talk about self-control. I think another reason is that we have internalized faith. So we made faith all about what goes on the inside. And so we might, as we did a few years ago, spend some time looking at the Sermon on the Mount and read what Jesus says about things like prayer and fasting and anger and some other things. And we conclude that what matters is our attitudes. And as long as my attitude's okay, the stuff on the outside is not as important. Maybe it's not relevant at all. We also are very conscious that when we talk about our faith, we're not talking about religion, we are talking about a relationship. And that's maybe one of the reasons why we don't talk so much about self-control, because we're talking about, it's about a relationship. It's not about, and we've maybe lost the link between love and obedience and discipline. Again, I'm just touching on a few things that you might want to go away and think about and explore some more. We also have a very, within the West, we are very much focused on the individual. And this is a characteristic of Western culture. You might be scrolling through social media and you'll see things like you do you, live your best life, be your best self, all those kind of things. And so it's very much about me doing what makes me feel right and what's right for me. And we resist the idea that someone else might be able to tell me what to do and what is right or what is wrong. We resist the idea of being accountable to anyone else. As long as it's good for me, then I'm going to do it. And that wasn't the case with biblical cultures, and it's also not the case with many cultures across the world today. It's a Western thing, but there are plenty of cultures in our world where the decisions that you make aren't based so much on what you want, but they're based on family, they're based on community values. And so this individualization is very much a Western thing. I think maybe another reason we don't talk about self-control more is because we've reduced confession to just saying sorry to God in my head. And so we pray, and all we do, if we say sorry to God, then that's what confession is. And we have, and again, I don't want you to say anything that I say, and if you're in any doubt about anything that I've said, then please ask me. Don't go away and assume I've said one thing when actually I'm trying to say something else. And so in terms of confession, we've lost any sense that maybe confession involves talking to other people, and we've certainly lost any sense of needing of lament and kind of sitting in sackcloth and ashes. I'm not suggesting we do that, but hopefully you see what I mean. And I think with a lot of these issues, the reason we fall into the trap of it's either one or the other. And if it's not that, then it must be that. And so we go from one extreme to the other extreme, and we throw out everything else in between. And so we will skip over passages like Philippians 2, verse 12, which talks about working out your salvation with fear and trembling. We will skip over passages like Matthew 16:27, where Jesus tells us that the Son of Man is going to come and he will reward each person according to what they have done. Because we're saved by grace. It's not by works. And so what we do doesn't matter as much. But why might self-control and fasting, I've not really mentioned fasting much yet, but why might those be a good idea during Lent? Well, first two bullet points really quickly. Well, Jesus fasted and we want to be like Jesus. And Jesus, Jesus assumes that his disciples will fast. Then fasting creates time for ... You know, our desire is to be with Jesus, to spend time with Jesus, to be more like Jesus. And one of the main reasons for fasting is that it can create time to practice habits and disciplines that allow us to spend more time with Jesus and to become more like Jesus. If you've got a smartphone in your pocket, you may not be aware that there is a screen time function on there that it's usually in the settings part of the phone, and it will tell you exactly how much time you've spent on your phone in the last day or the last week, or maybe other settings for even longer. And it will tell you how long you've spent on any particular app. And it will even tell you how many times you picked your phone up in a day. So how many times have I been distracted from what I've been doing because I've picked my phone up because it's buzzed with a notification or something? And it will also tell you things like, well, when you picked your phone up, which were the apps that you went to first? So are you picking your phone up to check your work emails, or are you picking your phone up to check Instagram and YouTube videos? So it will tell you all sorts of interesting things. And if you go away and look at that later on, you might be shocked by what your phone tells you about how it's controlling your lives. And so when it tells you that you spend X number of hours on this particular app or that particular app, think about that app and think about how has my time on that app helped me become more like Jesus. Now, it might be that you spend 27 hours a week on the Bible app, in which that might be okay. But you might spend it on something else that's not very helpful at all. And so if we were to think about fasting and self-discipline and our phones, what might fasting from my phone look like? Well, it might be that I want to my intention is to begin the day with God. And so I want to spend some time at the beginning of the day just focusing, maybe reading a bit from the Bible, spending a few moments praying, getting my thoughts straight before I launch into the day. And so I'm going to decide that my phone is really unhelpful because it distracts me from that. And so I'm not going to pick my phone up in the morning until after I've spent some time from God. So maybe fasting from your phone might simply look like not looking at my phone until after I've spent time with God. Which means I suggest that you get a paper Bible, because I've gone off Bible apps, not because, I use them for various things, they're a brilliant tool, but I know that if I'm reading the Bible on my phone, there'll be an Instagram buzz, or there'll be a YouTube buzz, or there'll be an email buzz, and suddenly I'm distracted by something else. And so to not be distracted, I find it much more helpful to use my paper Bible rather than my phone Bible, just because it's so easy to get distracted. Another way you might want to fast from your phone is think about how you use it. And so if you get the bus to work and your habit is maybe scrolling through Instagram Reels or watching TikTok videos or something like that, then maybe decide that for Lent, what my phone usage on my way to work is going to look like is that I am going to use the Bible app on my phone, and I'm going to follow a Lent Bible reading program on something like YouVersion. And so rather than just endlessly scrolling through YouTube videos about cats and all sorts of other things, I might actually, nothing wrong with cats, I don't disapprove of cats, but let's just say that. But I'm going to use that time in a way that draws me towards the center of that circle and towards Jesus rather than pushes me away. Another reason that fasting during Lent from whatever it is we choose to do, it might be a good idea because it helps us practice self-discipline. Now, let me see if I can get this to work. Now, according to the internet, this is what dopamine looks like being delivered to your brain by a protein. I have no idea if this is real or whether this is just made up, but it's a nice little video. There's a motor protein pulling some dopamine towards wherever in your brain. When that arrives, you suddenly get that nice feeling, that happy feeling. Because dopamine is one of those chemicals that gets released into the brain that makes us feel happy, and it reinforces pleasurable experiences. And so it gets released in your brain when you eat chocolate. It gets released, cat's coming up again here, I'm sorry. It gets released into your brain when you watch those silly cat videos on TikTok. When you complete a level on that game that you're playing on your phone, when you finish it and all the lights come on, there's a sudden dopamine explosion in your brain, and you feel happy. And believe it or not, some of you might find this hard to believe, but it's also the sorts of chemicals that get released when you go for a run and do things like that. And so that's why these things can seem to be a little bit addictive, because we get these impulses in our brains which makes us want to do them again. Social media companies spend millions and millions and millions of pounds and have their brightest and best people trying to make their platforms and their games and all these other things as addictive as possible. They want you to stay there as long as possible. They want you to keep on coming back. And so we need to be conscious, particularly with our phones, that, they are deliberately trying to suck us in and to keep us there and to keep our focus on that. And so we do need to be self-disciplined and self-controlled if we are not going to spend far too long doing those things. Now, as I said, for me, one of my struggles is chocolate biscuits, crisps, and cake. This is our biscuit barrel as of this morning. It wasn't full, I should just point out. It was never full. I haven't eaten a whole load of biscuits. But we also develop patterns. And so this biscuit barrel sits in our kitchen, and it can be no temptation to me whatsoever at breakfast time. It could even be open. The lid could be off. The biscuits could be out on a plate, and I wouldn't be remotely tempted to have a biscuit. But it's very easy to develop patterns so come 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it's a totally different story. I can be sat working and I can think, it must be time for a biscuit. Or I go into the kitchen to start getting ready for tea, which will be ready to eat in about an hour's time. And I think, a biscuit would be nice. Just as I fry the onions, a little biscuit, that'll go well. And then it's 2 biscuits, then it's 3 biscuits, then it's 4 biscuits. And we develop patterns. And so my brain has come to associate 4 o'clock, starting to cook tea, with eating biscuits or having some chocolate or having a crisp. And so we develop these unhealthy patterns in our brain because of the chemicals that are being released and the ways that our brain works. Now, Paul knew that we were in a spiritual battle. And therefore, Paul knows that you cannot rely on dopamine as a good indicator of what we should be doing and what we should not be doing. Instead, Paul, in these verses from 1 Corinthians chapter 9, talks about making our bodies, Paul says he makes his body a slave. So he's talking about practicing habits and putting things into place where he's not going to let his bodily urges dictate his actions. He is going to say no, he's going to control his body, he's going to make it his slave. Because I know that eating too much chocolate is bad for me, but it doesn't stop me eating too much chocolate. And so the question is, am I going to allow my actions to be governed by that dopamine going off in my head and saying, oh, it's 4 o'clock, it must be time for a biscuit? Or am I going to say no? And I'm not going to allow my bodily impulses to dictate what I do. I'm going to make my body my slave. Now, as I said at the beginning, I've been using chocolate and biscuits as an example because that's particularly relevant to me. It might not be relevant to you. So don't go home and throw away the biscuits and certainly don't give them to me. Because the application is going to be different for each one of us. So how can we practice self-discipline this week? Well, as I say, we're in a spiritual battle, and so we need to pray for God's help. Pray that God would help us not only know those areas in our lives where we need self-control, but also to help us to have, when we see the biscuit, say no and ask God to help us. You've still got to do the overcoming, but pray that God will help us. Think about the why. Our motives are important. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, if my motives for not eating biscuits, chocolate, crisps and cake during Lent is because I want to lose a bit of weight. Now, I know that I could have a biscuit. I just need to run 20 minutes longer on my run. And if I want 2 biscuits, I just need to run 40 minutes longer. And so I know that I can still lose weight and eat the biscuits. And so there is always that temptation, I'll just have a biscuit and I'll run a bit longer tomorrow because it's going to be sunny and it'll be a nice way to spend the time. But if I'm aware this is a spiritual battle and I have consciously chosen to not eat chocolate, biscuits, cake and crisps because I want to discipline my body and we are involved in a spiritual battle, then that throws a whole different sort of light on the motivation thing. Because yes, I could eat a biscuit and yes, I could run 20 minutes more and it would have no impact on my overall weight. But if I've made a decision that to be more like Jesus, I want to discipline my body, and therefore for me, for the next 40 days, what that's going to look like is X, Y, or Z, then that just puts a different spin on how we look at it and our motivation. We need to recognize weak spots and remove them. Now, the Bible tells us to flee from temptation, not to flirt with it. And so, obviously, the best thing to do would be to get the biscuit barrel out of the kitchen. But unfortunately, I don't live on my own. And so there is a biscuit barrel in our kitchen. I just have to live with that. But it might be that the thing that we're struggling with, that we want self-control with, actually the right thing to do is just get rid of it so that we don't not put ourselves in that place in the first place. Get support, by which I mean we all know that when we do things with other people, it's a lot easier than when we try and do it on our own. And so maybe find someone that you can tell. This is an area that I struggle with in my life. I'm trying to get some self-control in there. Can you just keep me accountable? Can you pray for me? Can you encourage me? And so it's a lot easier to do things with other people. Then retrain your brain. So as I said, we can get into the habits of doing things that are unhelpful, but why not replace the unhelpful things with things that are actually going to help us? And so rather than reaching for the biscuit, put something else in place that will help us. So maybe rather than spending time on TikTok just before we go to bed, actually reading a book and choosing the book carefully in the first place, so that we retrain our brains so that we still get the dopamine, but we get it from something that's helpful rather than from something that's unhelpful. I did read somewhere this week that it takes 66 days to reinforce a new habit. So it's not an overnight thing. And so it takes about 2 months of kind of doing something before you start to get and I know from personal experience that doesn't matter how long you've been doing a good habit, give a week, it could all be up in smoke. And so you can get out of good habits really, really quickly. And consider the consequences. Paul talks there about so that at the end, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified from the prize. Paul is, and you think this is Paul writing, Paul's saying things like that. What hope is there for the rest of us? Well, thankfully, we are saved by grace, not by works. God is gracious and forgiving. And so we need to think about the consequences, and that can also help us as we seek to practice self-discipline. Because I'm sure that most of us would say that I do want to know Jesus more. I want to be more like Jesus. I want to spend more time with Jesus. And so why not spend some time this week thinking about our habits and maybe inviting God to help us shake up our habits a bit. What do I need to put down? What do I need to take up? So that when Lent comes to an end on Easter Sunday, I'm a little bit closer to the middle of that circle than where I am at the moment. I'm going to pray, and then we've got 2 more songs.